Good evening, everyone. We are continuing our study in the book of Leviticus. We're now in chapter 19, and we left off from verse 14, so we will continue from verse 15. Please remember that this chapter in particular repeats often the phrase Ani Yehovah or Ani Yehovah Elohim, which really means I, the Lord, your God or your Elohim. Whenever the Bible text uses Ani Yehovah, it is really to emphasize I am Jehovah, which also implies you are my people. I am God, but you are human. It is to emphasize the importance that these words coming out is spoken from God, that you must do because you're my people. And so this entire chapter in particular speaks a lot about that very emphatically. And then we talked about the fact that, yes, these were all spoken to the sons of Israel. But how about other people? Well, in chapter 18, yes, God has said that those sexual practices is the very reason why these people in the land of Canaan is going to be vomited out from the land, which tells us that God is very upset, very angry, and very disappointed and very disgusted with those kinds of practices, which also means that if God says that all the other people doing it, that God is upset and disappointed, then they shouldn't be doing it. And so God is telling his people, Ani Yehovah, I am God and you are my people. Do as I tell you, not as the other people. So it does apply to other nations. And so in chapter 19, you would find that there are instances where it makes a lot of sense that if God doesn't want the Israelites to behave this way towards each other, wouldn't it be true that it is what God expects that kind of a behavior of all other fellow human beings? And that would be the right thing to look at this chapter. Not only that it applies to the Israelites, it also applies to humanity as a whole because it refers to Israelite interaction with regard to the principles of living, and that should apply to all human beings because it cannot be that the Israelites can't do these things and then the rest of the world it's okay for them to do. And so let's take a look at verse 15 as we continue. Verse 15 says, You shall not do injustice. So you shall do no injustice. So this idea here is you shall not do. This is how it should be read. So it should be better read that way. Injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. In righteousness, you shall judge your neighbor. Then it says, You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. Ani Yehovah. So again, it says, Why do you don't do this? Because I am God. Ani Yehovah. Not only that I am God, that you are my people, I made you. Jehovah is the creator. And he tells us that life is sacred. The sanctity of life must always be upheld. And so we have Jehovah and then mankind. This relationship is what this emphasis is. Ani Jehovah. And I am telling you, man, and my people, that you should just do as I tell you. This is how I want you all to live. But if you look at it as general mankind in principles of life, it refers to exactly the same thing. So let me explain. You shall not do injustice in judgment. What is injustice in judgment? Injustice here means of a violation of justice. In judgment, in the court of law, in making judgments. Which means this, now in the community of the Israelites, there are judges. There are elders who are judges. There are leaders who are judges. They are always told by God to judge righteously, to judge justly. And so this word here, injustice, is a very special word, means do not violate justice. You see, in a justice system, if justice is violated, then there is no justice. The name of God is justice. I am a just God. So Ani Jehovah basically tells the people, this is who I am, and this is how you ought to live. Justly. When you pronounce judgment, it must be just. You must not violate justice. And then God explains, what do you mean by violate justice? Then this is the way. Be partial to. This word in the Hebrew means do not lift, do not lift face. Meaning, do not look at the poor differently. Do not lift face to the poor. Do not treat the poor differently from the rich. That is a violation of justice. And so that applies to everyone in the world, generally mankind. Why? Because God is a God of justice. When God makes a judgment, it must be fair. It must be seen to be fair, not just thought to be fair, because God is a fair God. And particularly, the poor would not be able to defend themselves. The poor will have no ability because they have no money. And so, generally, if the rich can buy justice, then it is a violation of justice when judgments are made. Now, the second word here is honor the person of the mighty. This word honor, it is not the same word as honor your father and mother. It is not about honor God, where the word is kaved, which is heavy. This word here is hadar. Hadar means um, to swell up, uh, to to enlarge. I think that would be a better word, to enlarge. To enlarge the person who is great. So, of the great. If you are a great person, you shall not enlarge him bigger than he is. And that means this. It means that when you enlarge a person bigger than he already is, you are making things more proud and arrogant than the other person. But this one here is enlarge face. So this word honor is not just enlarge, it is to enlarge the face of the great. Now, beyond this, uh, there are words that we must be very careful. It's written in an Eastern Oriental style. The Hebrew people are Eastern Oriental. Violation of justice is making judgments by lifting face to the poor, looking at the poor differently, detestably, being partial. That no, they don't really care about the poor people, just care about the rich. This is what it means to be partial. Don't do that. Don't give more face to the person who is great. Which means what? When you're making a judgment, that you are going to treat the rich, the powerful, the famous, the important people with greater treatment than the poor. That's the contrast here. That if you do that, that would be a violation of justice. So what if he is important? So what if he is a prince? So what if he is rich? Does that mean that the poor does not deserve a fair trial? So, in God's mind, fairness and justice means to treat everyone equally. Next word here is in righteousness. What does it mean in righteousness? This word here is sedek. In sedek. Now, sedek and sedekah comes from the word of treating the poor, making sure the weak, the needy, the fatherless, the widow, doing what is right in the society. That's tzedakah. And it's righteousness. That's the right thing that God wants them to do. To make sure that the poor, the weak, the needy, the widow, the fatherless are treated well. So in righteousness you shall pass judgment on your neighbor. Now, this word is a different word than this word here. So this word is re'ah. Re'ah. This word here is amit. So let me explain that there are nuances. Re'ah literally means fellow man. Who is your neighbor, who is your friend, and you all live together. So this neighbor is really to say uh, the person who lives around you, the person who is your friend, and they are all of the same family, same tribe, or same nation. Now, amit is another word that tells us that it has the same or similar meaning. Amit is the fellow nation member. So it gives another nuance here. It's your friend, it's your kindred, right? Or your kindred. I think that is also a good word to use. So this word here gives us another flavor of your neighbor, your companion who is from your same nation. So you must treat them well. You shall judge and pass judgment on your neighbor in a right way, in a fair way, in the way that God would expect one to treat another fellow man. You shall not go about as a tale bearer. Now, this word tale bearer really is a gossip monger. Gossip monger. Now, what is a gossip monger? A gossip monger is a person who would go around bearing tales, uh, creating scandals, uh, loving to create stories to cause problems among your people. Now, this word here, among your people, is among your people as in the nation. Also, among the Israelites. Nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. Now, this word here, take a stand against the life, literally means uh, you shall not stand upon the blood. Stand upon the blood of your fellow Re'ah. That would be your fellow man. Which means that all of these are using similar words here, Re'ah, Amit, Re'ah. So what is that telling us is the focus on your fellow man is important. Fellow man is important. And yes, it is amongst the nation of Israel, amongst your tribe, amongst the kindred. And that is how you ought to live. That you need to treat them right. If you can't treat your fellow man right, how much better can you treat the other fellow human beings? And so, in a more narrow sense, Ani Jehovah, I'm telling you, I'm the creator. Life is sacred. You cannot take the life of your neighbor. Does it mean that a non-Israelite can take the life of his neighbor? And the answer is no. You cannot take the life of a fellow human being. And so if they can't even do this amongst themselves, then they are a very poor example to all the other nations. So when we read this text as a non-Israelite, we should realize that this is how God wants them to live amongst each other. It should be how God wants mankind to live amongst each other. That in our lives, our court of justice cannot see violation of justice. We cannot be partial and treat the poor differently from the great and the rich. When we help our neighbor, we shall be able to treat them fairly. That we should not go out talking bad about other people amongst our community and nations because it will stir up trouble. So this is a troublemaker creating fables and scandals, and that is no good because life is sacred. If you can't treat a fellow man in your community in the right and proper way, and of course, make sure that they are fairly treated, then gossiping and tale bearing, scandal mongering, and creating stories would be wrong. If there is evidence, bring it to the court. If there is none, you should always be able to treat your fellow man fairly. Don't take the life of the blood of your fellow man. Ani Jehovah. Verse 17. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear the sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear grudge against any children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then it says this, Ani Jehovah. Now, of course, we come to a point where this is a most famous expression. So let's take some time and understand this. You shall not hate your brother. This word hate is sane. So think of it this way. In the Hebrew language, sane really means to turn away because you really detest a person so much that you turn away from your brother. Now, this word here is brother. Brother in the terms of the family member, brother in terms of the fellow man, that's your brother, in your heart. Now, this word heart is levav, and that would be in your mind, in your will. What does that mean? It really tells us that you are not to really treat your fellow man with hatred. That is the way. Hatred means you don't turn away from them in your decisions. Your heart means your decisions. It is not a matter of feeling, right? Don't turn away from your brother, even though he has done wrong. You must always deal with your brother. Don't hate your brother. Don't turn away from your brother. You shall surely rebuke. Now, this word rebuke is to reproof. Reproof here means to yep, rebuke, reproof, to correct, to make right, right? Make right. So this word rebuke is to make right. And then this word neighbor, again, it is amit. Amit means your kindred. And then do not bear sin. The word bear sin is to be be guilty because of him. Now, let me explain the text. The idea here is, in the event your brother has done something wrong, do not decide to go against your brother. Do not turn away from your brother. You should correct and make him right and teach him to be right, right? And you do not be guilty because of him, where you will do something wrong because he may have done something wrong and you add on to the wrong. Now, that's the reason why it says, do not bear sin because of him. Now, this word here is, do not make in unintentional sins. And this word sin is unintentional. By trying to avoid him, you then become wrong. That is this meaning here. So we must be the conduit of helping our brother, of our fellow man, to become better, to help them see the truth. Now, if you can't do it, you do it in some way where other people can. But the idea here is, don't turn away from him and let him be and let him die, because that is not how God wants mankind to live. Then you shall not take vengeance, and that I think is easy to understand. Uh, Verse 18 is, do not avenge, right? Do not avenge. Why? Because vengeance is a toxic feeling. So don't take vengeance. Don't take grudge. And this one is grudge. Vengeance and grudge is about the same meaning. But here, it really tells us, this word here is to don't, in the idea of natar, don't guard your emotions to a boil. Don't cherish anger. Do not cherish anger against the children of your people. Why? Because vengeance, as you can see, a lot of cultures have vengeance that will take you on from generation to generation to generation, and it will never end. And there will always be generational family fights. And because that's vengeance, and your anger cannot be contained. And so don't do that. And so if there is a problem that has occurred, settle it. Make it right. This word surely rebuke is not go and tell him in the face that he is wrong, but find a way to make right and make peace. Why? This is the famous verse. Because the word here is you shall love your re'ah as yourself. And love here is ahav. Ahav is to, let me put it here, ahav is love. It is to protect and provide. So you need to protect and provide for your neighbor, your re'ah, your fellow man, your companion, your friend, within your family, within your community of the same people as yourself. So you should love yourself. What do you mean, love yourself? This is not a 21st century psychological advice. This is very much God's advice to the Israelites. You protect yourself, you provide for yourself, for your family. When you look at your neighbor, your re'ah, you should also do that so that you protect and provide for your neighbor as you would yourself. Why? Ani Jehovah. This is God. God provides for his children so that you who are able should also love and protect and provide, especially when there is injustice, especially when things go wrong. You must do your part to correct it. Do not make an error because your neighbor made an error. That is what it means here. Don't avenge. Don't fight your people's children. Don't carry that anger into the next generation. If you are to protect and provide for your family, well, imagine that and do the same for your neighbor's family as well. Their children is also to be cherished. That is what it means by love your neighbor as yourself. Love your fellow man as yourself. If you cannot love your fellow man, then how would you go about treating other human beings who is not your fellow man? God says, Ani Jehovah. What does that mean? It means that I am God. I am the one who made heaven and earth. I am the one who made all human beings. If you can't, Israel, take care of yourself, how am I going to expect everybody else to learn from you? And so, as a non Israelite, this is as important a lesson for us as well. Next, we have these phrases: you shall keep my statutes, you shall not let your livestock breed with another kind, you shall not sow your field with mixed seeds, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you. Now, all of these has to do with the laws within Israel because the statutes are given to Israel. So it comes back to Israel. If the other nations don't do it, it doesn't affect them, but it affects Israel. So that when they breed their livestock, they cannot breed with another kind. Now, what does it mean, another kind? Another kind means another type that cannot mate with each other. Understand this word kind. It is very important. So, as part of the statute, they said you don't let your livestock have sex with a different type of animal. Now, in chapter 18, we have seen that the issue of bestiality is there, that humans, male and female, are not supposed to have sex with an animal. And now God gives this law that Israel needs to be very careful to ensure that their livestock do not have mixed breed, that even when animals cannot mate, don't put them together to allow them to mate because it is unnatural. That's what it means. Do not sow your field with mixed seeds. If these are plants or and crop that cannot intermix or they cannot be cross fertilized, then don't plant them that way. Nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool, two very different kinds, one from an animal and one from a plant, come upon you. This is the idea of mixed fabric. Even in a mixed fabric, you should not do that because linen is linen, wool is wool, and a corn and a different kind that they cannot fertilize. They are not supposed to plant them together. So this is the rule of no intermixing of crops as well as livestock as well as fabric to make into clothing, that they can't mix. And in a way, you can find that they are to be aware that the natural way of life must always be maintained. Now, verse 20, it says, whoever lies carnally with a woman. Now, lies carnally, the word here in the Hebrew basically means to lie down. But as a euphemism, it means to have sex. And it says, whoever lies with a woman who is betrothed to a man. The idea of betrothed to a man means she is already assigned, assigned to the man. This word lie carnally is to have sex for the purpose of breeding, all right? For the purpose of seeding. This expression here. There's a series of words in the Hebrew. So the English translation says lies carnally. Please bear in mind this is really not just have sex, but for the sex of seeding. A woman who is already assigned to a man, uh, but this word here is as a concubine. All right, so let me explain the entire verse first. Who has not at all been redeemed nor given her freedom, for this shall be scourging. They shall not be put to death because she was not free. And he shall bring his trespass offering to the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of a meeting, a ram as a trespass offering. The priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering before the Lord for his sin which he has committed, and the sin which he has committed shall be forgiven him. Now, many people reading the English will have a challenge, so let me just help clear things up. This woman is betrothed to a man, but this woman is not betrothed just as a wife. Is not a wife, but is actually a maid servant. So I put here a maid girl. A maid girl or a slave girl, if you want to call it that way, a female slave girl, and she has not been redeemed. Not been redeemed means not paid the debts, nor have been given freedom. The idea of not given freedom literally means freedom from from being a maid. So let me explain this. In the Hebrew context, you would find that when a person owes money and is unable to pay, uh, they can actually, uh, in a way, repay by being a being a servant for a duration of 7 years and work through the repayment process. And while in that situation, she is already betrothed to another man, she is still in that state of paying off her debts, so not redeemed, or that she is not free. So this is an A and a B. So if you are not redeemed, you have not paid your debt, you are not having freedom. That's the same thing, right? In A and B. This is not adultery because a woman who, in that context, is under the ownership, so to speak, or a temporary ownership, because the concept of a person who is sold as a slave is temporary for a period of time, after which all her debts will be forgiven. But during that time, uh, a man lies with her is not considered adultery because of her state that she is a servant or a slave girl. So they shall not be put to death. If she is a free woman, then there is adultery, and that rule of the adultery will come to bear, then they will be stoned to death because she was not free. In this case, the way to resolve this is to bring an asham, a trespass offering, an asham, to the Lord. And then you would know what it is, and you bring a ram, and with this, it will be atoned for him, go through the ritual, and the sin which he has done shall be forgiven him, and the case is closed. Now, this is unique because of the state of the girl who is in his care and in his ownership in that sense, because she owes him money. Now, that is the rule of the day, right? Rule of the day. Next, verse 23. When you come into the land, that means when you go into the promised land, and you start to plant all kinds of trees for food, you shall count their food as uncircumcised. And this is very unique to Israel. In verse 23, it says that you must treat them as having been not part of the covenantal symbol. So when a person is uncircumcised, a person doesn't have a covenant like the descendants of Abraham. So when it applies to the trees, they are to treat their fruit as uncircumcised, but only for a period of time. The period is this: for the first 3 years, it shall be as uncircumcised to you, because in the first 3 years, when the tree grows, it generally doesn't bear fruit until the fourth year. And so it is treated as uncircumcised because the tree's fruit is not ready to be consumed. It is just bearing early fruit. And God says, as a rule, you don't touch it. It shall not be eaten. That's a rule to Israel. But in the fourth year, all its fruit shall be special, a praise to the Lord. Now, what does that mean? A praise to the Lord means it's given to be rejoiced. I think that is something which, because we're not gardeners and farmers, I suppose. we are not aware of how to treat these uh I guess we are not aware of how to treat the plants. But this is not any plant. This is the plant when you get into the land and you start planting for new. That is what it means. When you start planting for new, then you will not eat the first 3 years. The fourth year can be eaten, but in the fifth year, it will be to yield its increase. Why? Because the fourth year is called the first harvest. And the first harvest is a holy harvest. It is to be reminded that this land belongs to God. But from the fifth year onwards, it is then a regular yield. And it says, Ani Jehovah Elohim. Now, why all these? This is to tell them that I am God, you are my people, just do as I say, because they have never done this before. They've never entered into a new land. And so, in that new land, this is their rule. So, it refers to them. Next, verse 26. Verse 26 then says this: You shall not eat anything with the blood, nor shall you practice divination or soothsaying. You shall not shave around the sides of your head, nor shall you disfigure the edges of your beard. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. Ani Jehovah. And so now we have an issue. This issue here would be how God expects them to behave. Now, verse 26 is this: You shall not eat anything with the blood. What does that mean? You shall not eat over the blood. That's the Hebrew word. There is a way of looking at this. One of the ways that they may say is this: um, you cannot eat with the nefesh. That the animal cannot be alive when you eat it. So you shall not eat anything with the blood. That the blood has the nefesh. Remember, the nefesh is in the blood. That the nefesh is alive because the blood is flowing. And so you cannot be a cannibal. So you can think of it that way. And so anyone who eats an animal before the life leaves uh, is a problem. Now that is the meaning here. Don't be a cannibal, right? And God's instruction to everyone, including well, the sons of Noah in Genesis chapter 9. Then you shall not practice divination or soothsaying. Now, divination and soothsaying is this: the idea of divination is to look at signs. You know, when somebody looks at signs and gives you the verdict of fortune, of omens, of magic, that's one area. Soothsaying uh, is is when you practice something that you can see supernaturally, that you cannot explain. The idea of magic, occultic, witchcraft, and that kind of thing. I'm saying that supernatural events do happen. And God is warning the Israelites, don't practice them. Why? Because when you practice them, the people will turn away from God and follow all these curious things. And then they will not depend on God anymore. And so you shall not practice, which means that it can exist in ways that we may not be able to explain. But it is not for Israelite because they will make these things their gods, their idols, if you think of it that way. You shall not cut around the sides of your head, which is your sideburns, for the men. And you shall not disfigure the edges of your beard. And so let your beard grow naturally. And so this applies to the men of the Israelites. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh. Now, this word cuttings is important. Incisions. You shall not, this word is seret. You shall not scratch. You shall not lacerate. You shall not make small cuttings into your flesh for the purpose of the dead, the people who died. That is not the way to remember them. Nor shall you tattoo any marks. Now, this word tattoo is to cut markings. So the idea of tattoo any markings means do not cut into your flesh. Uh, do not cut into your flesh anything that you want to imprint. So tattoo any marks really is cutting an emblem, cutting a figure, cutting something on you. And so it will be, I suppose, similar to what modern day tattooing is. And God doesn't want any permanent markings, because if something is cut into the flesh, it doesn't go away, and it will be always reminding you of something which God tells you not to do. And so this is God saying, Ani Yehovah. Very important, particularly to the Israelites as well. In our last segment, you can see here, verse 29. Do not defile your daughter. Do not make her common. So the idea of prostitute is actually a translation issue. Do not make your daughter common. She is special. She's your daughter. Don't defile her and make her into a harlot. Right? Don't make her into a harlot, and that would be the idea. Lest the land fall into harlotry and the land become full of wickedness. The idea of wickedness here is evil, it is licentiousness. And in chapter 18, you will find in verse 17, so Leviticus 18, verse 17, is a reminder of why the land that they are about to possess, the land of Canaan, is about to vomit out their inhabitants because of this evil. And so they're not supposed to make their daughters into prostitutes, into harlots. Else the land will fall into that, and then God will have to vomit them out. Next, you shall keep my Sabbaths, reverence my Sabbaths. And then it says, Ani Yehovah. So why is the Sabbath so important to God? Remember, reverence here is to fear my temple, my sanctuary, my tabernacle. Keep guard my Sabbaths, because it's to teach them what obedience to God is all about. This comes from Exodus chapter 16. The Sabbath is one of the few positive commands that comes with a capital punishment. They will be correct. Same thing with my sanctuary. If you are unclean and you come into the sanctuary, you will be karat. Ani Yehovah, I am a clean, holy God, and so shall you be a special people. And so you learn to be a special people by keeping the Sabbaths so that the nations around knows that, hey, that's very different. And that's because of God telling them to do that. Give no regard to mediums, to familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. Ani Yehovah Elohim. Again, it's to tell them, be very clear, don't deal with necromancy. Right? Medium is necromancy. Don't deal with the dead. Don't deal with spiritism, familiar spirits. And that would be the idea of necromancer as well, right? Of spiritism. To think that they are calling out spirits of the dead, which is not. And all of these will cause people to turn away from God. Do not chase after them. Do not be unclean by them, because if you do that, you will be unclean. I am a clean God. I'm a holy God. And that's how we should read this. You shall rise before the gray headed, honor the presence of an old man, fear your God. Ani Yehovah. Now, what does that mean? You see this, you shall arise, wake up before the elderly. When it says elderly, it really means the older people, gray headed. This word here is about the aged, the ones with who are old age and they have gray hair. The next one is to honor the presence. Same thing as Hadar. You do not enlarge. This is to enlarge the face. Just now, under injustice and violation of justice, would be do not enlarge the face of the mighty. Here it says you should enlarge the face of the old man. And then you must fear God. Same thing. Be afraid of God. Why? Because I am God. I'm telling you that you must honor and take care of the elderly because they can't take care of themselves. Just like you have to take care of the poor, the needy, the widow, as well as the fatherless. If a stranger dwells with you in your land and you then you shall not mistreat him. So we're talking about the ger, like Ruth. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Ani Yehovah. Now, this is not to take care of those who are going to come and kill you, but is to take care of those who are the ger. They are strangers, and when they are in the land with you, when you're in the land, they don't own the land. So they are also stranger in that sense. But like Ruth, when she comes in with Naomi, she doesn't own anything. She has nothing. And you notice in the idea of uh, Boaz, Boaz is very particular about this rule to take care of the girl. He knows that she is from Moab and she has embraced the Jewish nation or the nation of Israel, followed Naomi back. And so they treat him, he treats her extremely well. Treat her as though one who is a native. Do not mistreat. Do not mistreat. And then you notice this phrase, you shall love him as yourself. You see, love your neighbor as yourself. Yes, love your kindred men, but you shall love the ger as yourself because they have nothing and they live amongst you. And if you can't love and provide and protect the ger, then how are you going to deal with those that you don't know, that you've got no relationship with? That is what God is saying. Verse 35. You shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, and honest ephah, and honest hin. And then it says here, Ani Yehovah Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So one more that we need to pay attention is this. In verse 35, you shall not do, not do, and this word injustice is violation of justice. So it's again, God says, I am a just God. And so you are to reflect my character of justice, of fairness. And so you cannot violate the fairness of measurements of length, weight, or volume when you do your business. When you say it's 1 kilo, it's 1 kilo. There is no such thing as 0.98. That's not 1 kilo. If you say that, then you would. So you find that when we go to, say, the land of Israel in Jerusalem, when a Jew who fears God deals with you, he will give you exactly 1 kilo of fruit when you buy, of figs. And then it's commonplace in this part of the world that you would suggest, why don't you give me one more? Well, that would not be fair because you're taking more than 1 kilo. And so the Jewish trader would then reweigh and then recalculate because that would be fair. Justice. You shall have honest scales, the weights, right? In those days, when you measure things, you must have all these that you measure, whether for dry goods, wet goods. This is for grain. This is for oil, for volume. Why? Because it is just. It is fair. Treat everyone fairly. And so with this, it says, I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. You belong to me. You reflect me. So the final verse here says this. Therefore you shall keep all my statutes, all my judgments, and do them. Ani Yehovah. So if you look at this, it is to guard all my statutes, all my judgments, whatever God tells them, to be fair, to do exactly the details, and then to perform them, to execute them. It is not for talking purposes. It's for living purposes. Because I am Jehovah, I am a living God. All these rules and judgments shows that as Jehovah, your God, you are my people. It is for you to live by so that you can demonstrate the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.